I welcome you all with a warm heart on this crisp winter day to a very special session, Eunoia, Operation Smile. Sounds interesting, right? Eunoia can be interpreted as beautiful thinking or a good mind. Today's session focuses on the importance of mental health and what we can do being students. Art is the set of wings to carry you out of your own entanglement. Art has been used as a means of communication, self expression, group interaction, diagnosis, and conflict resolution throughout history. Art therapy is an integrative mental health and human services profession that enriches the lives of individuals, families, communities through active art making and creative process. Art therapy has been shown to improve people of all ages. Research indicates art therapy can improve communication, concentration, and can help reduce feelings of isolation. This type of therapy has also been shown to lead to increase in self-esteem, confidence, and self-awareness. Like we have been saying this throughout our campaign, mental health is no joke, and art therapy is an efficient tool in making good emotional health possible. Now, to explore such a rich concept, I would like to welcome our esteemed guest speaker, Ms. Rebecca Poyner, who is an art therapist. Now I call upon Ishwari to take a first step.
Thank you, Shreya. Fred Rogers said, anything that is human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can be more manageable. When we talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. For those of you who don't know, it's actually morning time there in Texas. Yet, Ms. Poyner has so graciously accepted our invitation for this seminar that we, the members of Leo Club, are stoked. Rebecca ma'am is an art therapist and a licensed professional counselor from Texas, USA. She earned her bachelor's degree from Washita University in 2013 and her master's degree from Southwestern College in 2016. Following her education, she worked with children, teens, and adults using art therapy to support mental health. Rebecca ma'am worked in Aurangabad in 2016 and 17, working with women and children with art therapy. Since then, she has worked with adults overcoming substance addiction, survivors of trafficking, and patients in hospital for various needs. Rebecca ma'am is also currently on the board of North Texas Art Therapy Association. In her free time, Rebecca ma'am enjoys time outside, traveling, and creating her own artwork. She wanted to work with children in art, but she also wanted to focus on smaller groups than what a teacher works with, and found grading of artworks to be restricting. So voila, art therapy solved her problems, and she pursued it to perfection. We are very glad to have you here with us today, ma'am, and more than eager and highly curious for the session to begin. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Good morning or good evening to you all. Like they said, my name is Rebecca Poyner. I am an art therapist here in the US, but I have been in India. I was there for about 6 months in 2016 and 17, and I loved my time there. So I am going to get started and just talk a little about art therapy and what I do and the benefits of art therapy. So I'll get started with just the definition of what art therapy is. It sounds like we already had a definition, but I'll just give a brief summary. Art therapy is a way we can use materials and the relationship between the art therapist and the client to help improve mental health. So art therapists are trained in how to use various art materials with different mental health needs, and as well as we're trained as counselors and talk therapists as well. So why do we do art therapy versus just talk therapy? Is because art and our visual communication affects a different part of our brain than our verbal communication. So when we are creating visually, we can learn new things about ourselves and about each other versus when we're just talking. Sometimes we can be used to filtering our words or saying just the right thing, but we're not as used to filtering our images and we can discover new things about what we're feeling through our imagery. So there's two schools of thought really within art therapy. There is art psychotherapy and then art as therapy. Art psychotherapy is the school of thought where our image can tell us something about ourselves and we can learn more, and it has a deep meaning. And then art as therapy is more of the act of art itself is therapeutic and relaxing and calming. And the image isn't as important as the process. You will find most art therapists fall in the middle. So the act of creating art is very calming and relaxing, as well as the image can have some meaning and can tell us more about ourselves. It is impossible to not be in the present moment while creating artwork. So if you struggle with anxiety about the future or overthinking what happened in the past while you're creating artwork, you just stay in the present moment, which can be very calming. Even if you're creating artwork about the future or the past, you have to be in the present moment to create. So that is one of the calming things about creating, is that it can reduce anxiety. And when our thoughts are just going, it just can get us into our exterior world and out of our heads. So those are just some of the benefits. And I'll kind of go into the history a little bit of art therapy. It began around the 1940s. Who they call the mothers of art therapy would be Edith Kramer and Margaret Nomberg. They really kicked it off. Carl Jung was a psychologist prior to that who did see the benefit of creating art with mental health, but Edith Kramer and Margaret Nomberg really started the whole profession and creating it as a separate skill besides just talk therapy. Now, art therapists can be found in many different places. There are art therapists here in the US in nursing homes, in schools, in prisons, in psych hospitals, in medical hospitals, in pretty much anywhere you would find a therapist, you could find an art therapist. I have currently worked in a nonprofit working with all age of children, as well as hospital settings and with veterans. And my specialty is working with people who've experienced grief and trauma. So anything overwhelming, all these big emotions that can be hard to express through words can sometimes be easier to express through imagery and through movement, things like that. So that's where we can be found. And I'm just checking my notes, making sure I don't miss anything. We work with all ages. So most art therapists will work with children starting around age 6. If someone younger than 6 is needing some therapy, they'll typically go to play therapy. But due to their brain development and abilities, will start around age 6. And then I have worked with people all the way up to age 90, just working on, end of life circumstances or depression, things like that, as they come towards their end of life. So all ages pretty much with art therapy, as long as you can hold a marker or a pencil, you can do art therapy. And I will say, it does not matter your skill level for art therapy. So it's not art class where we're working on skill level. I have worked with people who've had a stroke or traumatic brain injury where they have lost most of their strength in their hands, and we've had to tape pencils to their hands, and we're working with a physical therapist to build strength. And so it's less about the product or the way it looks and more about communicating a message, if that makes sense. So we can work with all varieties of skill level. I have worked with professional artists as well as people who have never created art before. It's my belief that all human beings are creative in some sort of way. So problem solving or cooking or music, art, dance. We all have the ability to create, and every culture has a form of art. There's not a culture in history that doesn't have some sort of creative outlet. So that shows me that it's important to all human beings to find some way to create. So we can work with people who have mental health needs and physical health needs. Like I said before, we can typically we can team up with a physical therapist or occupational therapist if they're needing more physical needs, maybe building muscle in their hands. But typically we will work with mental health needs, so people struggling with depression or anxiety or any other mental illness. I'm currently working with people who struggle with substance use, so men who struggle with alcoholism or drug addiction. And so they are working to overcome that. Typically we can face lots of grief and trauma along the way. So we have various projects and directives for them to help guide them in their own healing. There I work with both groups and individuals. So an art therapy group is typically between 7 and 12 people. So it's a smaller group, so you can really get to know each and everyone. And what typically happens is they arrive and we check in on how they're feeling and how their week's going, and then I will give them an art directive, such as I recently did create a landscape that matches how you're feeling. So it could be a tornado or a desert, or it could be a valley or a forest, something that matches your emotions of the day. And so typically I'll have them use whatever materials they would like to create the image, and then at the end we discuss it and why they chose what they chose, or how they're feeling at the end of the day. Most of the time they will end up feeling better than when they started. So my groups right now are about 2 hours long. However, I've done some groups at 1 hour long and some groups at 3 hours. Just depends on the needs of who I'm working with. And then in my individual sessions are similar. I will talk with them a little bit about what they're hoping for and what their goals are, and then give them an art directive to help them learn more about themselves. Sometimes when a popular one could be to look towards the future and what our goals are. And so we'll cut out magazines, pictures, vision board is what we call it, which would help give them some goals, something to look forward to. And so we will do that in individual sessions and just talk about it. A lot of art therapy is just building the relationship between the clients and the therapist and creating safety and comfort, relaxation. Because for many adults especially, it can be intimidating to make art here in the US. I didn't run into this problem as much in India. We're such a creative culture, and there's just art all around. But here in the US, it can be a challenge for adults to allow themselves to sit and create. And so just helping them get comfortable with that and seeing the value in it. we can be a very productivity-based culture. I think all over the world people can be, but it can be hard to just slow down. And if they don't feel like there's going to be something gained from it. So it's a lot about building relationship and showing them the way. Now, as far as like the materials, we have every material that you could possibly imagine. It used in art therapy. Each place is different based on their budget. So we have a list of basics that each art therapist needs. So we need drawing materials such as pencils and colored pencils, markers and crayons. And then we would need, a step further, some chalk pastels and oil pastels. And then a step further would be paints, watercolor paints and acrylic paints. And then we also include collage materials like magazines and pictures you can cut out, especially for people who feel very intimidated to draw or paint. I also have clay in my art studio and various found objects that we can put together and use in a creative way. The things that you wouldn't normally think, like I have seashells and rocks and beads and recycled materials, things like that. Some of my favorite projects are used from recycled materials, using materials that people may have thrown away and could be used for something new to make it beautiful. I really enjoy that. Just like a metaphor of how sometimes we can feel broken or not worthy, and we can be rebuilt into something new and beautiful with some time and some effort. And so that's something I enjoy. And then there are some other art therapists who have larger studios who do woodworking or, very materials that would be kind of dangerous to use. But there's art therapists everywhere who have a variety. Now for myself, I like to have a variety in the room. So colored pencils, crayons, all the way to paint and clay, because actually the materials people choose does give me some information about them. So it's called the Expressive Therapies Continuum. It's a scale of materials. On one end of the scale, we have pencils and rulers, and it's very structured. And then on the other end of the scale, we have watercolors on wet paper that's very unstructured and very hard to control. So, and then there's, in the middle, all of the others, we can go from pencils to markers to chalk pastels to paint. And what the information gives me is if someone comes in and I let them choose whatever materials they would like, if they choose like pencils and rulers, that might tell me that they're a structured person. They like details and they're very particular. They might struggle with perfectionism. And so we can work with that. And then if they choose the watercolor on the other side, that could tell me that that person might be a very emotional, sensitive person. And they might struggle feeling overwhelmed by their emotions, and they're deep feelers. So with the person who chooses pencil, I'm going to slowly over time help move them towards the paint, one material at a time, to help them let go a little bit of their perfectionism and let go of the structure a little bit, become a little more fluid. And with the person with the paint, I'm going to slowly move them towards the pencil, help them feel like they can contain their emotions and not feel so overwhelmed by them. Neither one is bad or wrong. It's just the goal is for each person to feel comfortable with a variety of materials. Some things that I am aware of when working with clients is some materials could we use the word trigger, but could affect people with a variety of traumatic experiences. So if someone has a very strong trauma, maybe sexual abuse or physical abuse, they might really struggle with the paints because they can feel very out of control. And so I would really want to not force someone to do something that they felt uncomfortable with. And clay is also very fluid and out of control feeling for someone who's been through a traumatic event that maybe at that moment they didn't have any control. And so a material that feels out of control could bring them those feelings again. So I'm careful with that. And that's again why I let people choose their materials, because I want them to have at least some sense of comfort and safety in that. And I'm checking my notes again to make sure I've covered everything. So that's the ETC. And then there's also developmental cues of what we look for in art therapy. So developmentally, if a person had a trauma before they could talk, say they had a natural disaster hit their home or something like that when they were a baby, they might be inclined to do what we call kinesthetic art, which is very movement-based and typically doesn't have an image with it. So I worked with a client one time where we just nailed nails into a piece of wood, and the sound of it and the feeling of it was very soothing for him. So for an hour, we just nailed, and it wasn't any image or anything. It was just the movement that was soothing for him. He had had a trauma before he was able to talk. And then if someone has a trauma around, ages 2 to 4 or 5, really, they might enjoy what we call sensory art, which is art that can engage in the senses. So, for example, one thing that I do is shaving cream prints, so that we take shaving cream and put it in a tray, and then food coloring and place the paper on top. And so it's the smell of the shaving cream is really soothing, and then the feeling and gets messy, something that maybe a 2 or 3-year-old would really enjoy, can be relaxing for someone who experienced pain during that time. Another sensory object would be, we have scented markers, anything that will engage into our senses, or maybe finger painting would be really a great option there. And then we can move up into the next stage, or we start to have drawing, that scribble drawing, things like that. And then we can move up onto the next stage of stick figure drawing, simple drawings, but we're starting to have a specific image, and then it keeps building up. And so typically when I'm working with a client and I'm watching maybe what developmental creative stage they're in and what we're working with. So we're looking at, their brain development, as well as personality through the art materials and the imagery. And the most important part about art therapy is what the client says about their image. A lot of clients for me are worried that what am I reading into their artwork, but mostly I want to know what they feel about their artwork and what they see in it and what they learn about themselves through it. I have a strong belief that clients are the experts on their lives. And so my job is to ask questions that help them think through different ways to look at their art and discover new things. So they might create a piece of artwork, and I would say, where would you be in this artwork if you could be here? Or what feelings come up for you when you look at the artwork? Or, just different questions about it, so they can discover for themselves what it means to them. And for instance, one of the directives I give is for each of your family members that you grew up with, choose an object from nature. So maybe your mom could be a flower and your dad could be a tiger or something like that. And then they draw these images on a paper. And then I ask them, who is the biggest on the page? Does that tell us something? Maybe that's in life, maybe that's the personality that's the biggest in the family, or someone look more, or some of them look closer together than others. Maybe mom is next to sister or something like that. And it's not always, definitely going to be true, but it gives them something to think about. Oh, you're right. My mom is really close with my sister, or something like that. To think about how the image reflects their lives. So that's an example of how we can learn about ourselves and others through our images. And yeah, I'm trying to think of how to become an art therapist. So how you become an art therapist in the US. I know it's different in other areas. In Europe, they have a different system. But how I did it in the US is I had my undergraduate university in fine art, and then with a minor in psychology. However, I know others do a major in psychology and then a minor in art. So you can do it either way, but you do need to have some experience, at least just knowing how to use materials. You don't have to be a great artist to be an art therapist. You just have to know how to use materials. So, and then for my graduate degree, I have a master's in counseling as well as in art therapy. So in most of the US, there are some states that are different, but in most of the US, you need to have your counseling degree as well as your art therapy degree. So you're trained in both talk therapy and art therapy. And for my undergraduate degree, it took about 4 years, average undergraduate degree here. And then for both of my master's degrees, it took me 2.5 years. So some people took longer and some people went quicker. I was kind of in the middle. And then after your degree, you need about 6 to 9 months of internship, learning and studying under supervision. And then you can apply for your license and take the national counseling exam as well as the art therapy exam as well. So 2 large exams and some internships in school. Overall, it took about 7 years to complete. And one day, hopefully soon, after 5 years of practice, I can apply to become a supervisor and then help other students on their journey. So that's the goal for me, is to become a supervisor. I enjoy teaching others about art therapy, and it's been a passion of mine to spread the word. So that's the goal. But that's pretty much everything I have. But I wanted to open it up for questions or see if there's anything anyone's curious about.
Thank you, Rebecca, ma'am. I just had a few questions that we had gathered from the audience before. So do you mind if you can answer them?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the first question is, how do you personally use art to help with your mental health?
Yes, I definitely need to create art for my mental health. So because I choose to work with grief and trauma, a lot of my clients have very tough stories that can be overwhelming at times just for me to hear all day. So I try to spend the last 30 minutes of my day to create a small image that reminds me of my day and in the strengths that I see in my clients, what went well, or what was hard. and just a way to contain the day before I go home so that I don't continue to overthink about it at home. I can just leave it at work. So that's one thing specifically with my art and with work that I do. However, on the weekends, as you can see, I have a little art studio here at my home. And so I also create art. I know for me that if I'm not creating artwork, that's normally a sign that I'm not doing very well mentally. Maybe I'm tired and I'm not taking care of myself. So it's a good thing for me when I'm creating art. And I particularly like creating art for others. So I like creating art as a gift to others. It just helps me be happy.
That's really awesome. So you just look at the positive sides of stuff, and that helps you go and use it personally for your health.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. And our next question is, what are your favorite forms of art? Like there are various forms that are all throughout the world. Which one are your favorites?
My favorite forms of art, like my favorite materials to use, or
Yeah,
favorite
materials, technique, and both combined.
Right. So in college, I had my degree in ceramics. So I used clay. I created sculptures and then also threw pottery on the wheel, things like that. So I really enjoyed the clay because I felt, it was a challenge physically, and I felt that it helped build my confidence. I had some hard things happen to me in high school, and when I was in college, that really helped build my confidence and teaching me like I can do these really challenging things. And at first it was very frustrating, but over time it was really rewarding. So I loved ceramics. And then since college, it's been challenging to have those materials accessible because it does require a lot, like the kiln and glazes and everything. And so mostly now I watercolor paint or paint with acrylics. Yeah, but every once in a while, I will also do the found object art. Something about that is just, it gets me thinking outside of the box. Again, I guess I like the challenges of, creating art with some material that would not typically be used for art.
That's a really unique initiative. And speaking of challenges, is there any message you have for aspiring artists?
Oh, yes, I would say, just continuing to create, even on days that you don't want to, or doesn't feel like it, you don't feel like it, but just pushing yourself to find new ways to create. And I would also say create for you and not just to sell it or for others, like not always thinking about what others want, but just like discovering, okay, what is your voice and who are you and how can you show that through your artwork?
Okay, I have just two more questions. So the second last one is, how can we release our school stress through art? Like, what are some creative ways, like as students, that we can release our stress through art?
Yeah. So one of the projects I do most for stress relief would be like coloring with colored pencils, either creating your own design or even just a coloring book if creating your own design is too stressful. But just noticing while you're coloring how much pressure you're putting on the pencil, just being mindful of that, just relaxing and being intentional with relaxation. So we create a lot of mandalas. If you've heard of a mandala before, we do that a lot for relaxation. Sometimes just creating something small can be less intimidating. And then, yeah, just focusing on the pencil going back and forth, back and forth. Another directive that I do to help relieve stress is I have a circle loom with several strings for a braid. Anything that uses both of your hands is going to be stress relieving. So that's called bilateral movement. So if you're swimming, that's going to be stress relieving, or knitting, if you know how to knit, or crochet with both your hands. Or I'll have even clients who don't like making art, bouncing a basketball, or just going back and forth between your left and right hand, because your left hand is connected to the right side of your brain and your right hand's connected to the left side of your brain. So any like rhythmic movement that's not too challenging, but it's going to be stress relieving. Mm-hmm.
Cool. I can see definitely a lot of students, especially in our school, will use that as well. Thank you again. And then our last question is, what measures do you take to not get too involved in a patient's problems? Like, this is from a person who wants to become an art therapist.
Yes. It can be a challenge, especially for those who are very empathetic, and the people who are drawn to this field are people who are empathetic and are great feelers. And so it can be a challenge not to take on problems. One thing that I was taught in school was, as soon as you get home, change your clothes, take a shower, do something physically different to like tell your brain that, okay, I'm at home now, I'm not at work. Another thing that can be helpful is journaling, or creating art, like I said before. And then another thing that somebody else did that was helpful is, before, they had a tree out in their front yard, and before walking into their front door, they would touch a leaf to the tree and give the tree all of their burdens, and then walk in. And then as they came back out, they would take their burdens back from the tree as they go into work. Just like the act of putting it on pause, like, this isn't forever, but I'm just can take a pause from these stressors right now. But the biggest thing for me with working with clients who have such pain is also seeing their resilience and strength, and their ability to get through some really tough situations. And so I also just really find it just beautiful working with the most painful situations, because these people are survivors and so strong and courageous. And so I'm really focusing also on the beauty that is that does come from suffering as well.
Thank you. And I just got a few more questions. Would you mind answering these as well? So
I have, yeah, no problem.
So art needs concentration. So what do we do if we can't focus?
Ooh. Yeah, so sometimes it may be looking at why you're struggling to focus. It sometimes could be maybe you're intimidated by art, or you're not as interested in it. And so just kind of looking at, where the struggle is. However, if it's maybe more of someone who struggles with ADHD, something like that, I might have more of an active art directive for them. Like we can, for some of my clients who have just a whole lot of energy, we will put a huge piece of paper on the wall, like covering the wall, and we water down some paints and we make a mess, we throw it, and we get really active and get some of their energy out. So it's kind of hard to not concentrate on that, because it can be really fun. but sometimes it just is kind of pushing through. And then once you get going, I often will see people struggling in the beginning, but once they get going, they kind of get sucked in and they're able to focus.
That's great. Another question is that you mostly talked about dealing with grief and trauma, and sometimes people tend to withdraw and just don't interact. So then how do you use art in such cases? Like you explained that you use actions and make them get physical and all that stuff. Is there any other way, or you also, bring out all those feelings that they want to talk about, but they just can't?
Right. Yeah. I don't ever want to push someone too much, right? So if they're not ready to talk about these challenging things, then I don't force them to do that. So we might focus on their strengths, and safety. And so if looking at maybe shame or anger or sadness is too much, we'll look at peace, hope, and strength. And that's typically where I want to start with individual clients anyway. And then kind of moving into the pain when they feel comfortable. But if they're not comfortable making art at all or talking at all, that's fine too. There has been times where I'm very comfortable with silence. And so I'll just sit with them in silence until they're ready to talk. Normally, they are less comfortable with silence, so they'll just start talking or doing something. And so that's one thing we did a lot of training in school, is to get really comfortable with silence, and not pushing people too far too quickly, because then that can be overwhelming and very scary. So did that answer the question, or?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
And then there's one more question, like for those who don't have an art therapist near them or they cannot access one, how can they use it in their daily lives?
Well, there's a few books on it that have various directives. One book in particular I can write in the chat for you all if you're interested, but it has a variety of directives that you can choose, like different ones you want to look at, and then also gives questions to ask yourself about the artwork. There's that. And then there's all kinds of social media accounts on art therapy that give various directives and YouTube videos. But really, it's just if you don't have an art therapist nearby, but you're interested, then I would suggest, start making your own art a practice, a weekly practice, if it can't be a daily, but just a few times a week, finding time to create, even if it's just for 10 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour. But yeah, there's all kinds of YouTube videos and TikTok and Instagram, all those things with art therapists and things like that.
We just have to find time for it and be more consistent. Yeah. And then we have another question. So if a person suffers from both anxiety and perfectionism, then they just tend to get anxious if their art is not perfect. So then what do you do in that case? And how do you reduce that type of feeling?
Yes, this happens very often. So a lot of times people who struggle with anxiety struggle with perfectionism, because a lot of times anxiety can come from a place of wanting to be perfect. And we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And so how I do that, especially with my clients who is very, very, very strong anxiety and perfectionism, I might have them, if they're willing and they trust me, I might have them draw with their non-dominant hand. So if they're normally drawing with their right hand, I would have them draw with their left hand. And because that really gives them permission to just mess up and let go of that, because we can't be perfect with our non-dominant hand, and they can always just blame it on that and not their abilities. Another thing I will do is spray a piece of paper with water, wet the paper, and then paint watercolor on the wet paper, because it's very hard to control. The colors go everywhere and blend. And again, this is a permission to be imperfect. Sometimes those of us who struggle with perfectionism really need permission to purposefully mess up. Because if someone gives us permission to mess up, then it's okay. So to make mistakes and do it wrong, and it'll be perfect.
Yeah, thank you. And this is our last question. So some people, they also suffer from depression, and sometimes they can come out as rude or sometimes disrespectful. So how do you manage to break through their walls? And then what tips would you give for those people that are suffering from depression?
Yeah, so I myself struggle with depression, and it can be overwhelming. And yes, it's very common for people to be irritable and angry while struggling with depression, because if you think about, when somebody is in physical pain, they can be irritable and angry because they're in pain. Well, the same is for depression, they're emotional pain. And so a tip that I would have for that is, or how I work with it, is first of all, not to take it personally, because it's not about me when they're angry or irritable. So just recognizing that that's their depression talking. It's not necessarily about me. And the next thing I would do is look at, what anger is often what we call a secondary emotion. So typically we have anger is what shows up, but right underneath the anger can be fear or sadness or shame or guilt. So kind of exploring what is really going on underneath the anger. And, patience is key when working with anyone. But yeah, just helping that client see what could possibly be underneath the anger. And a lot of times it can be anger may feel safer for them to feel than sadness or fear or shame. So they may not want to go there right away, but over time, and they can start to go there. Yeah, so that's what I would say. It's like not to take it personally, have patience, and then help them explore what could be underneath the anger and depression. Yeah, so depression is typically when we're trying to shut an emotion down, then a lot of our emotions can get shut off. So if we don't want to look at our shame, we can try to push it down and not look at it. But then we also tend to shut off our joy and our sadness and our anger and things like that. We can shut all of our emotions off, and that's when we can feel depressed and numb, because it's hard to turn off one emotion and not turn them all off. So it's just slowly going into it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for answering those questions. I now hand over to Ishwari.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Those were some really insightful answers. We would also request you if you can show us some of your artwork right now, or just share it with us later on.
Yes, let's see if I can show you now. Some of these are not finished. I have some. So these are not necessary for art therapy, but they're just my personal artwork that I do. Art as therapy. I have lots of color and lots of floral. I like flowers. And then I have lots of like abstract, like shapes and color, just kind of looking at how they all interact. And then I don't know why I just saw this person's face, I think online, and I just liked the emotion, so I just painted her. Let's see. This is a painting I'm in the middle of, but it's to represent my own healing in my own mental health journey, but it's like an anatomical heart. I'm going to add some flowers to it and things like that. I think none of these are finished, but yeah, that's a little bit. And I can share, I have a website with my art on it. I can share in the chat here.
We would love to see it, ma'am. I'm sure the artists present here are so inspired by your art and by the way you talk. Thank you, Ruel, and thank you, ma'am, for answering all the questions. As we reach the culmination of this rewarding evening, I request Mansi Kulkarni to propose the vote of thanks. Over to you, Mansi.
Thank you so much, Ishwari. Art is a constant agent of transformation and is indeed the soul's drive to health. Art therapy didn't sound like much, right? But I'm sure the depth of it has transcended to our core and has helped us discover our true selves. We cannot be more grateful to Miss Rebecca Poyner, providing us with an opportunity so fascinating and so uplifting that we could just not get enough. We wish for the time to never stop and go on and on. It is said that everyone deserves a voice. Thank you, ma'am, for showing us a way to hear ours. As the day comes to a close, Miss Rebecca's is just beginning. It must be around 8 or 9 there in the morning, right?
Yes.
Yeah. But you're still looking so fresh and so vibrant while conducting this seminar for us, rewarding us with your precious time. This day will surely be remembered as a very euphoric day for all our attendees, and the credit goes to you, Ms. Rebecca. A point I would like to mention is you look very similar to an American singer, Anne-Marie, if you know her.
Oh,
Like when I saw you, I just got clicked this, like, you know, it really looked like Anne-Marie.
Oh, I'll have to look her up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And just talking and listening to you made us realize how calming and soothing it must be for your patients to have you as an art therapist. Once again, we are extremely grateful to have you today, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I've loved talking with you all, and you all looked so engaged and great listeners. So thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am. We also thank all our fellow students and are proud of you all to have completed this session with great enthusiasm, ardor, and zeal. It's true that when you say therapy, we are cast down thinking, oh, what will I tell others? Why am I doing this? Or will others' behavior towards me change? Well, all of us at some point or the other in our lives go through this. And clearing our heads before we jump in the game-changing arena of our lives is what we aimed for. Thank you very much for everyone present here, for making this event so enjoyable, fun, and worth the time. Thank you, fellas. Also, we are really grateful to the management for permitting us to host such a wonderful personality today. And last but not the least, kudos to the Leo Club for arranging such a fabulous show today evening. To conclude, George O'Keeffe rightly said, I found that I could say things with color and shape that I couldn't say any other way. Things I have no words for. And that was rightly proved by all of the words that ma'am said to us right now. So thank you very much, ma'am, for rewarding us with your precious time. It was an amazing session and we loved you. Your smile, the way you spoke and everything. We are just highly inspired. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. I hope you all have a good evening.
And you have a good day ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Have a great day. Thank you, everyone.